Did we improve our revenue? My name's Andrew. I quit my job as a corporate banker to start a business in a foreign country, and today I'll be reviewing the performance of my second harvest of 15,000 chickens. We'll be going over the operating performance, financial review, how much money we made, and we'll look at one surprising thing that happened that led me to believe somebody may have been stealing my chickens. So if you're new to the channel and you don't know much about integrated farming, I encourage you to go watch the first performance review that I did, where I do a deeper dive on the business model, the supply chain logistics, and essentially from a basic level how things work. But I'll do a quick 30-second summary here regardless. So I'm what's called a contract grower, meaning we are contracted by a larger company known as an integrator to grow chickens on their behalf. We don't process the chickens, we don't sell the chickens, we are quite literally just paid a fee to grow them. So the integrator drops off the chicks, we grow them, then they come pick up the fully grown chickens. So the fee that we're paid depends on a few key performance metrics: harvest recovery, how many birds actually get harvested, the average live weight, what the average weight is of the birds that are harvested, and the feed conversion ratio. This is essentially a measurement of how efficiently we are growing the birds, or how efficiently the birds are converting the feed we give them into weight gained. Now with that quick background out of the way, let's see how this cycle progressed and how our performance translates into money in our pockets. Let's get to it here. Class is in session, folks. We're getting corporate. Buckle up, we got graphs, we got tables. This is a real presentation here for you, so this is special. I got my notes up in front of me here, so I'm prepared. Well, first take a look at how many chicks actually started the cycle. So we had 15,000 chicks delivered to the farm, but we had 23 DOA and we had 21 chicks that we rejected. So we typically reject chicks if they show signs of weakness, injuries, physical abnormalities, anything that leads me to believe that these chicks are not going to make it to the end of the cycle. We get rid of them before the cycle actually starts. Now, as we move into the cycle, we'll start by reviewing the mortality, which is exactly how it sounds, how many chicks died throughout the course of the cycle. So we'll look at this on a week-by-week basis and compare it to the previous cycle. So early on, week one, my main focus here is dialing in the temperature and maintaining a steady environment. It's very, very critical in the early days that you maintain stable temperature inside, or else you can essentially create irreparable damage to the chicks, where you start seeing poor uniformity bleed in because of your poor management in the first 3 days or so. So we're a lot more proactive with using the brooding lamps only when necessary, and that really paid off. As you see, our mortality here in the first week is 163 chicks, which is 288 chicks less than cycle one, at 288. We were cooking here off the start, so things were looking good. Now, as we go into week two, we see much of the same, 137 chicks in our mortality in week two. That's about a 50% reduction in mortality compared to last cycle. And again, I think this is largely from dialing in the temperature. So this farm, it's just tarp siding. It's like an open-sided farm with just tarp protecting the inside from the outside. So as such, temperature fluctuations outside heavily influence what the temperature is inside. So if you're not actively mitigating against, let's say at nighttime, the temperature's dropping to 20 degrees, but you want it inside the farm to be 30. You need to be on top of that and be proactive on getting your heaters on if you want to maintain that steady temperature. And then when the daytime comes and outside's naturally 30, then you can dial it back, and you really just want to minimize what the fluctuation is in the environment inside the farm. Like, consistency is generally both in the work and tasks that you do and the environment you keep in the farm is really the name of the game here. And we did a much better job of that this cycle. So as we head into the final weeks here, week 3, week 4, you see the disparity in mortality is not as huge, but that's somewhat to be expected. As your typical cycle goes on, you see your mortality start to taper off and drop down, or at least you hope to, as the chickens, they get bigger, they're stronger, they're more resilient. You know, if they're making it to week 3, week 4, they've it's survival of the fittest essentially. So at that stage, you typically see your mortality decline. So we still saw marginal improvements, but not as big as week 1 and week 2. Now fast forward to the final day of the cycle, which was day 31 for the cycle. We had a 31-day cycle. You can see our mortality is 593 chicks, which is 4% of our starting population and about a 43% reduction in our mortality compared to last cycle. So really, really big improvement here. So with all these improvements here in our mortality, we were dialing in the environment to some extent. We were doing a better job here. We've learned from a lot of mistakes in the first cycle. How did we perform in terms of weight gained? How did the average live weight progress throughout the cycle? Not great, to be honest. Not so great. We kind of consistently lagged the weight that we would want to be at week after week, and that just kind of carried out throughout the cycle. And we also started to see some uniformity issues from around week 2 onwards, and that carried out to the end of the cycle as well. So we did a better job at managing the environment. We did not do a perfect job at managing the environment. And you can see here in our weekly weight samples, we even trailed the first cycle consistently week after week, but I honestly think this is because our cycle 1 weigh-ins were just done really poorly. It's like when you do these weigh-ins, these sample weigh-ins, essentially 2 things you want to do. You want to, 1, make sure you're taking samples from different areas around the farm so it can be representative of the entire population there. And if you have bad uniformity, like we certainly did cycle 1, you want to make sure the samples you're actually taking includes a range of size birds, and you consider the nursery as well. Because generally, if you have bad uniformity, the larger birds are easier to grab, so you can easily just fill up a bunch of samples with the biggest birds in the farm, and then it really skews your average live weight to be a lot more than it is. And if you have a large nursery, which we did at the time, and you don't consider that in your average live weight, then you're really overshooting what the true ALW is of your population. So that's what I think happened cycle 1, but regardless, cycle 2, our weight still wasn't growing very well. This type of farming is just a series of repetitive and often tedious things that you need to do day in, day out to manage the chickens. Like you are doing walkthroughs every hour to get them up and moving and stimulated. You're raking the rice hull, you're filling up manual feed trays. You need to dump a bunch of sacks of feed into the auger in the morning and in the evening. So it can be quite tedious to do. And if you're not consistently on top of it, say some feed trays are empty at various areas in the farm for longer than others, then that's when you can start, subtly incorporating some really bad uniformity that if you have inconsistent management throughout the whole cycle, then you are just creating inconsistencies in the growth of your birds. And I think that's what we're seeing here. And that's what we had a long chat about. And you see, we made an all-time comeback here. If you look at our average daily gain into week 3, more than doubled. So our main Kuya Rodwell, we got him in check and we came back big time, and our weight ended up being at a place where I was fairly happy with by week 4. So now that we've seen our mortality, what that looked like throughout the cycle, we saw our progression of weight, lackluster, but how that looked like throughout the cycle, let's get into the harvest and the official results here. So to kick off the harvest, we did a thinning on day 28. So what a thinning is essentially we are harvesting a minority portion of the chickens ahead of the full harvest. So the reason we did this is because we were showing signs of not so great uniformity, but we still had a good chunk of the population that were of an adequate weight. So the idea is we harvest the ones that are already a good weight, and then this creates more space for the undersized ones to grow over the next few days until the final harvest. So you can essentially tighten up your uniformity where you harvest on day 28 and then the smaller ones grow for another few days. And then when you harvest those, they're roughly, in somewhat of a more uniform size compared to the ones on day 28, if you kind of see what I'm saying here. So that was the strategy there. And this is the result of that truck. So we harvested 2,572 chickens at an average live weight of 1.38 kilograms. So not too bad. And at this point, I'm thinking, okay, we're almost at 1.4 kg. We have 3 days left. So I'm not overly concerned about our weight anymore. But for the next 3 days, the main focus is really on the smallest chickens we have in the farm and can we get them up to the minimum threshold weight of 900 grams. So we fast forward here to day 31. We have 5 trucks scheduled to show up and finish clearing out the farm. Let's see what the results are of each of those trucks. So truck 2, 2,568 chickens harvested at an average live weight of 1.52 kilograms. Solid start here. Truck 3, 2,570 chickens harvested at an average live weight of 1.18 kilograms. 1.18. We will get there after I go through the rest of them, but wasn't happy about that one. So truck number 4, 2,565 chickens harvested at an ALW of 1.36 kilograms. Truck 5, 2,565 chickens harvested at 1.5 kilograms. And then the final truck, 1,490 chickens harvested at 1.4 kg. The final truck generally always has less chickens in it because that's coming in and just clearing out the rest of them. So you're not necessarily trying to fill that up to capacity, you're just clearing out what you have left in the farm. So if we aggregate all of these numbers, we get a harvest recovery of 14,330 chickens, or 96%, and an average live weight of 1.39 kilograms. So our HR, 842 chickens better than last cycle, and our average live weight is unfortunately down from last cycle. But there's two things that I want to point out here and make note of. So the first one is, when I spoke about the mortality earlier, on the day of harvest, we had 14,363 chickens alive, ready to be harvested. But we only harvested 14,330. Why is that? Because we had a certain portion of the chickens that didn't meet that weight threshold. So that's where you see the biggest improvement from cycle 1 here, where we only had, or not only, but we had 440 more alive chicks on the harvest day, but we ended up harvesting over 800 more chickens than cycle 1 because the uniformity in cycle 1 was absolutely diabolical. Like, it was just so bad. We had over 400 chickens left behind in cycle 1. And that is just it's just an absolute disappointment what that was. So I remember the feeling when the last truck pulled off and you turn and you have more than 400 chickens left in your farm, and you're like, holy Lord, that's not good. So that was the biggest improvement here, and really the biggest focus. Like, through a lot of the cycle, it wasn't like, let's get them as big as we can. It's just like, let's get as many chickens out of here as we possibly can, and let's not leave any behind here, because that was a huge hurt on performance and our biggest improvement here from my perspective. And now the second thing I want to point out here is, you look at truck, I'm just going back here on my PowerPoint slides here. You look at truck number 3, 1.18 kilograms. So when I first see this, it's clearly looking like an outlier. It's the third truck as well. Normally you'd see a lower weight, at least how we've done our harvest is like, you'd see normally a lower weight in the final truck, because that's when you're just clearing everything out, and then you're weighing all the bandsots or the undersized chickens to make sure they meet the threshold, and then they all get thrown on the last truck. But 1.18 here on the third truck was like, I was super shocked about that. So I actually brought it up to the integrator, and we ended up going to their processing plant and speaking with people that work there and getting an idea of their processes, how they keep an eye on the drivers and whatnot. So I don't think anything happened here. I think it's plausible that this would have happened, but I'll just make note that you need to be cognizant of things that can happen at various points in the supply chain that can cause some surprising results on what you're expecting. So there's, like, you always hear of, an example like this would be, you always hear of people that have situations where chickens get swapped out of trucks, where people will sell the larger ones and put smaller ones in there, or they'll even sell chickens along the way to the processing plant. So you always hear things like that. You are allowed to follow the trucks to the processing plant if you want. You can go see them get weighed. So we didn't do that this time, but maybe at some point in the future. I just thought it was an outlier and I was surprised about it. So something to be cognizant of to anybody in the game here. You need to know where people's incentives lie and what parts of the supply chain may be vulnerable to some sketchy behavior. But anyways, we saw our harvest recovery. We got our official average live weight. It's now time to calculate the feed conversion ratio. How efficiently did these birds convert the feed into weight? This is the most important statistic for me, because this is the biggest influence on how much I get paid. So this is how the FCR is calculated. We look at how many bags of feed we gave the chickens, multiplied by the weight of each bag, and that is over the harvest recovery multiplied by the average live weight. Essentially, weight of feed consumed over weight of chicken, to put it simply. So if we plug our numbers in here, 630 bags of feed, we had 14,330 chickens harvested at an ALW of 1.39, we get an FCR of 1.4 2.58. A lot of you, this number probably means nothing. And it didn't mean anything to me until I got involved in the contract growing or just poultry broiler growing game. But to set a benchmark, anything around 1.5 would be considered good. Last cycle we got 1.7, so we were down, or we reduced our FCR meaningfully here. In absolute numerical terms, 0.12 doesn't seem huge, but essentially every hundredth of a decimal point here actually improves my fee. So something like 0.12 is actually a quite meaningful change in our FCR that has really positive influence on our revenue, and we will get to that right now. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time. We've reached the financial part of the video. So we're going to do what we did before. We're going to build out the income statement of this cycle, and we'll take a look at the revenue, or expenses, and profit or loss. It all comes down to this. So to kick things off, we'll start with our expenses. So being a contract grower, pretty much our only expenses are just pure operating expenses core to running the farm. So if we run a commercial operation, you typically see an expense line called cost of goods sold, and that would include items like the chicks or the feed. But since the integrator directly organizes that, pays for it, and then they deduct it from our fee, we don't consider that on our income statement. So we are looking at just operating expenses here. That said, we'll start with our basic recurring items here, what we know and have to pay every single cycle to run the farm. So we have our utilities, 50,000 pesos, Wi-Fi, 2.5 thousand, payroll, 25,000, gas, 75,000 pesos. That was by far our highest operating expense. I think it was last cycle too, but we used a lot more gas. I think we used like 18 tanks, and we did have a gas leak that we got somebody to come check, and that's now resolved, but that would have contributed to the high usage of gas as well. But anyways, we have rice hull for 5.5 thousand. And rice hull, for those who don't know, that's the black, powdery stuff you see on the floor of the farm. Chick paper for 1,000 pesos, disinfectants, water filters, our harvesting labor for 10,000 pesos, and then cleaning labor and supplies for 18,000 pesos. So just quickly on harvesting labor, we hire a team that's local to the community, but it's not like we don't have like full-time employees to harvest, let's say. So we just contract them in just for the harvest once every cycle. And then we have a group of cleaners that we've been using that come and clean. So it's not the people that actually work and manage the farm that do the cleaning. We have other people come in and we just give the supplies that they need to do their job. And then after that, we have our repairs and maintenance. It came to 25,000 pesos about. So we repaired a huge tear in the side of the farm. We had to repair a fan again. We had to repair the motor to the automatic feeding line. Again, that's like the third time we've repaired that. So yeah, those are just kind of, I feel like when you have a farm in the state that this one's in, it's quite old. A lot of the equipment's old. Repairs and maintenance is just a part of every cycle here. And you just kind of pick away at it with the revenue that you have come in and improve things over time. And hopefully this becomes less of a burden over time. And then I put in an other category, which is just random stuff that come up. We buy tape, or we buy plastic straw, or we buy a light bulb or two, just random stuff like that that come up throughout the cycle. We have that at 4,000 pesos, and that gives our total operating expenses of 219,500 pesos. Now on to the revenue. We saw our performance. What is this translating into in terms of money that is hitting this business? We improved our performance. Did we improve our revenue? Yes. We did. Despite our average live weight still struggling a bit, we got our revenue figure up, and we arrived at a 34 peso per bird fee. So to get our total revenue, you look at our 34 per bird peso fee, and you simply multiply it by the amount of birds that we harvested, 14,330. That gives us a little over 487,000 pesos top line revenue. When we're talking revenue, we're talking top line that hits the business before we're deducting any expenses here. So when we move on to deducting our expenses, our operating expenses here, we arrive at an earnings before tax, which we'll just simplify and call it net profit, of 267,720 pesos bottom line profit figure. So this is certainly an improvement from last cycle and is really the improved performance that's driving any improvement in profitability here. So our expenses are relatively unchanged cycle to cycle. We just went over all the recurring ones, and then we have repairs and maintenance and then some other after that. So as long as repairs and maintenance isn't skyrocketing, there's not something really crucial breaking, they stay relatively the same, our expenses. So any improvement in profitability is purely coming from better performance and actually growing the chickens, and that's what we see here. It's also important to note here what an income statement is and what it isn't. Maybe I should have led with this, but what we're looking at here through an income statement is how profitable is the business operations? Does this business make money from its core operations? This is different from how much cash do you actually have on you. So large one-time capital expenses, like for example, after the cycle, we built a bathroom at the farm. I got new heaters, which were quite expensive. Those large purchases don't appear on an income statement because they actually don't impact the profitability of the core operations of the business. So this ends up on another financial statement, but nonetheless, things like that eat away at your cash, but you don't see it through the income statement. So despite having profit shown here, there's a lot of reinvestment that gets done after each cycle that eats away at, often all the cash. So that's just kind of the nature of the game, especially with a farm like this, and we're really heavily invested at this stage in just learning as much as we can. And part of that is repairing things, getting things fixed, working with different contractors, and getting a farm up to a better operational state. So this is the profit from the cycle, and then subsequent to cycle, we have capital expenses that are larger one-time purchases that take our cash and get rid of it. But it's necessary to the business as well. So just thought I'd shed some light on that, as well as I think it's important to know that when you're looking at the income statement, it's not always cash in your pocket, because there's things behind the scenes that require capital to improve the business and reinvest in upgrade equipment. So there it is. That's all I have for you here on cycle number 2. We are trending in the right direction, which is nice to see. And if you've made it this far through this quarterly presentation here. This is the quarterly poultry review, baby, and we're bringing it to you live. If you made it this far, like, subscribe. We've got a bunch of cool stuff coming. I think I just say that to lure you in, but like, subscribe. We'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.